The relationship between the United States and Israel has often been described as special, strategic, and even unbreakable. For decades, Israel has held a central place in U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East, where America's influence has long been tested by wars, diplomacy, and shifting alliances. But under President Donald Trump, while Israel received some of the most significant diplomatic support in its history, a deeper analysis reveals a subtle but important transformation. Some would argue that Trump's administration actually reduced Israel's centrality in U.S. strategy, shifting attention toward a broader, more transactional policy in the region, one where Israel was still a valued ally, but no longer the lone centerpiece. To understand this, we must first acknowledge the pro-Israel gestures that defined Trump's early policy moves. In 2017, Trump officially recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a move that no previous president had dared to make due to the explosive implications for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. In 2018, he followed through by relocating the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, defying international criticism. In 2019, he recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, a territory captured from Syria in the 1967 Six-Day War. These actions were not just symbolic, they were seismic. For many in Israel, particularly Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, Trump's presidency was seen as a golden era of U.S.-Israel relations. It marked a sharp departure from the Obama administration's often tense dynamic with the Israeli government. At first glance, it would seem absurd to even ask whether Israel's importance was diminishing under Trump. But foreign policy is rarely defined by symbols alone. It is shaped by strategic interests, regional dynamics, and long-term goals. This is where the picture starts to change. Trump's broader Middle East policy was not centered on Israel, it was centered on Iran. In fact, nearly every major move in the region, from withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal to imposing crippling sanctions and realigning regional alliances, revolved around countering Tehran's influence. Israel, of course, shares this goal, but it was not the only or even the primary actor in Trump's regional vision. Instead, Arab powers like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain began to rise in importance, both as arms trade partners and as political allies. This realignment became most evident with the signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020. Brokered by the Trump administration, these agreements normalized diplomatic relations between Israel and several Arab countries, including the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. This was, undeniably, a historic achievement for Israel, breaking decades of Arab opposition to normalization before the resolution of the Palestinian issue. Yet, it also exposed a new regional paradigm. Israel was no longer the sole U.S. bridge into the Middle East. The Gulf states had emerged as direct partners, willing to engage with Washington on security, economics, and technology, with or without Israeli mediation. Trump's team, particularly Jared Kushner, framed this as a peace through strength doctrine, but in doing so, they downplayed traditional peace negotiations between Israel and Palestine and instead elevated Arab monarchies as co-equals in shaping the future of the region. This leads us to another critical element: the sidelining of the Palestinians. Trump's administration cut all aid to Palestinian refugees, closed the Palestine Liberation Organization's diplomatic mission in Washington, and unveiled a peace plan, the so-called deal of the century, that heavily favored Israeli positions. While Trump presented this as a practical solution to a long-deadlocked conflict, it alienated the Palestinian Authority and was rejected outright by nearly every Palestinian faction. By removing the Palestinian question from the center of U.S. Middle East policy, Trump indirectly reduced Israel's strategic value as a broker or focal point. In other words, if the peace process was no longer a top priority, then Israel's role as America's essential partner in that process was no longer as crucial. Meanwhile, Trump's focus on arms sales and energy deals with Saudi Arabia and the UAE added a new layer to this evolving equation. These Gulf countries became major buyers of U.S. weapons and were central to Trump's economic diplomacy, the very kind he liked to showcase his job-creating victories at home. Additionally, his personal rapport with leaders like Mohammed bin Salman signaled a pivot toward a leadership club that included Israel but didn't revolve around it. Trump's Middle East was a web of strategic deals, power balances, and anti-Iran alliances, a network in which Israel was a strong player, but no longer the exclusive centerpiece. So, has Israel's importance diminished under Trump? That depends on how we define importance. If we judge by political support, then clearly no, Trump gave Israel unprecedented diplomatic wins. But if we assess Israel's role within the architecture of U.S. Middle East policy, then yes, a subtle shift is evident. Trump expanded the field of key players and shifted America's gaze from a binary Israeli-Arab conflict to a multipolar chessboard involving Gulf states, Iran, and broader economic interests. Israel remained important, but it now shared the stage with others, and its traditional monopoly over American focus in the region was challenged. This realignment may have been pragmatic, even overdue. After all, the Middle East is complex, and reducing it to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was always an oversimplification. But it also raises important questions about long-term alliances, the future of peace diplomacy, and the role Israel will play as the U.S. continues to navigate shifting geopolitical landscapes. In the end, Trump's Middle East policy was bold, disruptive, and deeply strategic. It embraced Israel, but also introduced a new model of regional engagement, one that may redefine how we think about America's allies and priorities in the years to come.